Stephen Callahan, a seasoned sailor, naval architect, and an inventor by heart, Stephen was not new to the whispers of the waves. However, life on land was casting long shadows on his soul, particularly a painful divorce that left him yearning for solace. This led to a dream to carve his own journey across the undulating blues of the Atlantic. He crafted a boat with his own hands, naming it the Napoleon Solo, as if foreshadowing his solitary journey ahead. The year was 1981, and with a heart full of hopes and eyes fixed on the horizon, Stephen set sail from Newport, Rhode Island, waving goodbye to the familiar shores. His destination was the vast, wild Atlantic, a place where he believed his spirit would find the rhythm it longed for amidst the waves and winds. The boat kissed the waters en route to Bermuda and then to England, each ripple telling tales of freedom and adventure. Yet beneath the adventure, there was a silent prayer for healing, for forgetting the scars of the past, and for rediscovering himself in the heart of the boundless ocean. The sails fluttered vigorously as he navigated through the waves, each day bringing him closer to the heart of the sea, his heartbeats resonating with the gentle lullabies of the ocean. His journey was not just a voyage across the waters, but a voyage within, seeking answers perhaps only the wilderness of the sea could provide. The serenity of Stephen's voyage was abruptly shattered on a fateful night in 1982, when the Napoleon Solo collided with what was believed to be a whale. The impact was devastating, tearing through the vessel's hull, letting the furious waters of the Atlantic rush in. Panic gripped him, but his sailor's instincts took over. As his beloved boat succumbed to the ocean's depths, he scrambled to salvage what he could. With adrenaline coursing through his veins, he managed to grab a few essentials: a spear gun for fishing, a water purifier, and a life raft, which would be his refuge for the days unknown. As he boarded the raft, watching the remnants of his boat disappearing into the abyss, reality dawned upon him. He was alone amidst the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Atlantic, with nothing but a sliver of hope and the star-studded sky above. As dawn broke, the reality of Stephen Callahan's dire situation set in. The vast ocean around him seemed to stretch infinitely, its waves mocking his solitude. His first day adrift was a whirlpool of fear, desperation, and a struggle to concoct a survival plan from the scant supplies he had. His mind was a tempest, but within that storm, a spark of determination flickered. The solitude of the sea began to show its true nature. At first, the only signs of life were the playful pilotfish and the swift dorado that circled his inflatable raft. But as the nights darkened, shadows of a more menacing nature emerged. One quiet evening, under a blanket of stars, the silhouette of a white-tipped oceanic shark circled the raft. Its fin broke the surface, casting ripples that shimmered in the moonlight. Callahan, although weary and hungry, became alert. This was a new challenge, one that required keen observation and quick thinking. Instead of panicking, he watched the sharks, trying to understand their rhythm and intent. He noticed they were curious, but not immediately aggressive. Yet, with every fish he speared for food, the blood attracted more of them, turning his survival routine into a dangerous dance. Realizing he couldn't avoid these predators, Callahan devised a plan. Whenever he speared a larger fish, he would let it bleed in the water. Like clockwork, a shark would come, drawn by the scent. But rather than approaching the raft, the shark would feast on the injured fish, its hunger momentarily sated, allowing Stephen a brief respite. Inside his raft, Callahan felt a semblance of safety. He ensured he stayed within its confines, especially during the perilous nights. The inflatable barrier became his fortress, his line of defense against the lurking threats below. But more than any strategy or tactic, it was Callahan's unwavering spirit that became his shield. He refused to see himself as a mere morsel for the sharks. Instead, he considered them competitors in this vast, watery arena. With each passing day, he drew from a well of mental fortitude, seeing himself not as prey but as a fellow survivor in the merciless realm of the sea. Days morphed into nights, each sunrise a reminder of his isolation, each sunset a trophy of endurance. The physical ordeal was merciless. The raw fish he caught with his spear gun was a far cry from nourishment, and every drop of desalinated water was starting to become more rare. His skin bore the brunt of the harsh sun and salty winds, turning into a canvas of saltwater sores. Yet, his spirit refused to bow to the harsh elements. He meticulously rationed his supplies, each day's survival a victory over death. His mind, however, was a battlefield. The endless solitude gnawed at his sanity. To combat this, he split his personality into the captain and the crewman, a psychological tactic to maintain control, make tough decisions, and stave off despair. His makeshift solar stills and rainwater collection systems were his lifelines, though they yielded just enough to keep death at bay. Threats loomed large and constant. The Dorado fish he caught for sustenance turned hostile one day, tearing a hole in his raft. With resolve forged in the crucible of survival, Stephen meticulously repaired his raft, the act itself a beacon of hope amidst the engulfing despair. The sea was both a friend and foe. Its ecosystem provided sustenance, yet its vastness swallowed the flares he fired, hoping to catch the eye of a passing ship. He spotted 7 ships, each a silhouette of hope on the horizon. Yet each sailed away, oblivious to his desperate flares, leaving behind a trail of despair in his heart. Each passing vessel that turned a blind eye to his signals was a hammer blow to his hope. But Stephen clung to life with a tenacity that defied the odds. His old-fashioned navigational techniques, aiming his raft towards the West Indies, were a blend of hope and skill, a defiance against the cruel fate that sought to claim him. On the eve of April 20th, 1982, after 76 long days adrift in the sea, the glimmer of lights from the island of Marie Galante pierced through the darkness that enveloped Stephen Callahan. The hope that had dimmed over the days blazed anew. The following day, a group of fishermen guided by birds circling above the raft found him just offshore. The sight of Stephen was a testament to human endurance. His body had withered away, losing a third of its weight, and saltwater sores adorned his skin. Yet his spirit stood unbroken. Once ashore, his road to recovery began. He spent weeks regaining his strength on the island, and while hitchhiking on boats through the West Indies before heading back home. The ordeal left indelible prints on Stephen's soul, yet the sea's call was irresistible. He penned down his journey of survival in the memoir Adrift, which became a beacon of hope and a manual of survival. Stephen continued to embrace the sea, making dozens of offshore passages and ocean crossings. Through his narrative, he shared not just a tale of survival, but an odyssey of the human spirit's boundless resilience. Stephen Callahan's 76 Days Adrift was not just a battle against nature's wrath, but a profound journey of introspection, each day a meditation on life, death, and the indomitable spirit of survival. His ordeal resonated with the primal chord of human endurance, reverberating through the annals of survival tales, a testimony to the resilience of the human spirit amidst the heart of the unforgiving sea. Many tales of survival against the odds exist, but few stand out as starkly as the story of Poon Lim, a Chinese sailor who survived 133 days alone on a life raft in the Atlantic Ocean during World War II, one of the deadliest and most expansive conflicts in human history. By 1942, the war had raged for 3 years and had drawn in most of the world's major powers, forming 2 primary alliances, the Allies and the Axis. The maritime routes were fraught with danger as German U-boats prowled the vast expanse of the oceans, hunting for enemy vessels. Poon Lim was a steward aboard the SS Ben Lomond, a British merchant ship. These merchant ships played a crucial role during the war, transporting essential goods, fuel, and sometimes troops. However, they were particularly vulnerable to attacks, often being unarmed or lightly armed, and therefore, easy targets for enemy submarines. On that fateful day of November 23, 1942, the SS Ben Lomond was on its journey from Cape Town, South Africa, to Paramaribo in Suriname. The ship was not part of a convoy, which made it even more susceptible to enemy attacks. Convoys, groups of merchant ships sailing together under the protection of Navy warships, were a typical strategy employed during the war to safeguard against U-boat attacks. However, some ships, like the SS Ben Lomond, braved the seas alone due to various reasons. As the SS Ben Lomond traversed the South Atlantic, it became the target of a lurking German submarine, a U-boat. These U-boats were stealthy, deadly, and notorious for their hit-and-run tactics. They would often remain submerged, hidden beneath the waves until spotting a potential target. Once they had a ship in their sights, they would unleash a barrage of torpedoes. The SS Ben Lomond's fate was sealed when one such torpedo struck it. The impact would have been tremendous, leading to panic and chaos on board. There's an unimaginable dread that comes with being on a sinking ship, miles away from land, in the middle of a vast ocean. The cold water, the fear of what lurks beneath, and the knowledge that every second counts as the ship takes on water can be paralyzing. Crew members and any passengers would scramble to secure life jackets and head to lifeboat stations. Given the suddenness of such attacks, there might not have been enough time for everyone to get to safety, leading to scenes of panic and desperation. As the ship took on water from the impact site, compartments would begin to flood. Watertight doors, if present and functional, would be closed in an attempt to contain the flooding and prevent the ship from sinking too quickly. If the ship's power was compromised, it would plunge parts of the ship into darkness, adding to the chaos. Systems that relied on power, like communication systems, would fail, making coordination among the crew even more challenging. Amid the turmoil, there would be acts of heroism. Crew members trained for emergencies would attempt to help others, guiding them to safety, administering first aid, and trying to maintain order amidst the chaos. As the ship began its final descent into the depths, those still aboard would face a harrowing decision: stay aboard and risk going down with the ship, or jump into the sea, hoping for a chance at survival in the open water. Poon Lim, in his instinct for survival, chose the latter, securing a life jacket and jumping overboard. The abruptness of the assault left little time for reaction, claiming the lives of almost all 54 sailors aboard, either from the devastating blasts or as the ship plunged beneath the waves soon after. But his ordeal was far from over. He found himself isolated in the vast expanse of the Atlantic. As darkness enveloped the horizon, Lim found himself alone in the vast expanse of the sea, the onset of a harrowing journey. The water could be chilling, leading to an immediate physiological response: gasping for breath, increased heart rate, and the onset of hypothermia if one remained submerged for too long. The churning waters, combined with the shock of the cold and the trauma of the ship's sinking, could disorient anyone. Floating debris, oil slicks, and the noise from the sinking ship would have added to the chaotic environment. Trying to get one's bearings in such a situation would be incredibly challenging. Amidst the waves and floating debris, Poon Lim and possibly other survivors would be scanning the horizon for anything or anyone that might offer assistance. The sight of other crew members or passengers struggling in the water would be both a source of hope and distress. The sounds would be haunting: cries for help, shouts between separated crew members or family, and the general cacophony of a disaster scene would fill the air. Poon Lim would likely have been shouting too, trying to locate fellow survivors or get the attention of any nearby rescue vessels. Amidst the vastness and the overwhelming situation, the sight of a life raft would have been like spotting an oasis in a desert. The raft, floating and intact, would promise a temporary reprieve from the immediate dangers of the open water. With his life jacket providing buoyancy, Poon Lim would have mustered all his strength to swim towards the raft. Every stroke would be driven by adrenaline, hope, and the primal instinct for survival. Finally reaching the raft, the challenge would be to pull himself aboard, a task made difficult by exhaustion, cold, and wet clothing. But once inside, the raft would offer a sanctuary, a small, bobbing island of safety in the vast, indifferent expanse of the ocean. The initial realization that he was alone on a vast ocean, without any immediate hope of rescue, must have been overwhelming. Poon Lim would have first taken stock of his situation, assessing his supplies and the condition of his life raft. The raft bore a humble survival kit: a flare gun, a pair of electric pots, a malfunctioning flashlight, a handful of chocolates, sugar cubes, and a jug of fresh water. Knowing that the limited provisions in his raft wouldn't last indefinitely, Poon Lim started rationing his food and water supply. This foresight proved crucial for his prolonged survival. One of his primary concerns was fresh water. To address this, he ingeniously used the canvas cover of his raft to collect rainwater. Over time, Poon Lim honed his fishing skills. Initially using his hands, he later adapted, creating fish hooks from wire found in his flashlight and nails from the raft. He even used small pieces of biscuit crumbs as bait, showcasing his adaptability. Birds that approached the raft, either out of curiosity or seeing it as a resting spot, became sources of sustenance. Lim held on to hope, believing the merchant navy would soon piece together the Ben Lamon's unfortunate fate. With its known route, he imagined rescue teams gearing up. Yet, he couldn't ignore the niggling thought that, given the wartime constraints, perhaps the sinking of a minor vessel wouldn't ignite immediate action. Lim's resilience was put to the test as days transformed into weeks. Nature's fury often lashed out at him, stripping away supplies and leaving him at the mercy of the relentless ocean. Exhaustion and despair weighed heavy, and his once plentiful fish reserves suddenly disappeared. Pushed to his limits, Lim turned to the seagulls overhead, carefully preparing their meat and using their remnants as bait. This ordeal also saw him confront predators from the deep. More than once, he wrestled with creatures on the raft's wet wooden surface, summoning every ounce of strength to ensure he wasn't overpowered. In a particularly daring episode, Poon Lim managed to catch a shark. Using the remaining water in his flask as bait, he lured the shark to his raft, and then used the water jug to fend it off. He managed to kill the creature and consumed its liver, a rich source of vitamins, and preserved other parts of its flesh. To maintain a semblance of order and time, Poon Lim marked each passing day on the raft. This gave him a routine and helped track the duration of his ordeal. Understanding the importance of physical health and the dangers of muscle atrophy, Poon Lim occasionally swam around his raft, while being tethered to it, to exercise his muscles. Loneliness, the vastness of the sea, and the uncertainty of rescue were massive psychological burdens. However, Poon Lim's daily routines, combined with his unwavering hope, were pivotal in preventing despair. Being in the open sea, Poon Lim faced the fury of nature, be it torrential rains, scorching sun, or rough seas. There came a point during his time at sea when Poon Lim was particularly weak and severely dehydrated. Fresh water was scarce, and the relentless sun only exacerbated his condition. His energy was sapped, and he found himself lying flat on the raft, perhaps on the brink of giving in to his circumstances. In this weakened state, a seabird happened to land on or near his raft. While details of his thoughts during this encounter aren't well documented, one can imagine the surge of hope and determination that must have welled up within him at the sight of the bird, a potential source of nourishment and hydration. With whatever strength he could muster, Poon Lim managed to capture the bird. This was no small feat, given his debilitated condition. Consuming the bird provided him with much-needed sustenance. Notably, the bird's blood offered crucial hydration, serving as a vital fluid replacement in the absence of fresh water. Furthermore, the incident also had psychological implications. This unexpected source of nourishment would have given Poon Lim a renewed sense of hope and determination. The raft provided limited shelter, and he had to constantly adapt to these changing conditions. During his time adrift, Poon Lim spotted ships on the horizon twice. These moments were bittersweet. The hope of rescue surged, only to be crushed when the ships passed by without spotting him. To signal potential rescuers, he used the flares and even attempted to ignite fires using the flare gun's cartridge powder. But the vastness of the ocean and the small size of his raft made him nearly invisible in the grand expanse. Such moments of hope followed by deep despair would have been mentally agonizing. Yet Poon Lim persevered, holding on to the belief that he would eventually be rescued. After an astonishing 133 days adrift in the Atlantic Ocean, Poon Lim's determination and hope finally bore fruit. The endurance he displayed throughout his ordeal was about to be rewarded. On April 5, 1943, off the coast of Brazil, 3 fishermen aboard a small boat saw a speck in the distance. As they approached, they realized it was a man on a life raft. He had drifted over 2,000 miles from the site, where the SS Ben Lamon's sank. By the time of his rescue, he was in a frail state. His once limited supplies on the raft were nearly exhausted, and the physical and emotional toll of his ordeal was evident. The fishermen, recognizing the severity of Poon Lim's condition, quickly transported him to land. He was brought to Belém, Brazil, where he received medical attention. Doctors were astonished at his condition, not just because of the physical toll but also due to the length of time he had survived adrift. His recovery was slow but steady, and as he regained his strength, his incredible story began to unravel. Word of Poon Lim's survival spread rapidly, first across Brazil and then globally. It was a beacon of hope in the grim backdrop of World War II, a testament to human resilience and the indomitable will of an individual against insurmountable odds. Poon Lim's story reached the ears of the British government, which was keen to acknowledge his remarkable feat. The British Royal Navy even made it a case study, as his survival techniques were deemed invaluable for the training of naval personnel. In recognition of his extraordinary will to live and his resilience, King George VI personally bestowed upon Poon Lim the British Empire Medal. This was an unprecedented honor, especially for a civilian in wartime. Poon Lim's rescue was not just the end of a harrowing ordeal, but also the beginning of his legacy. His story became legendary, serving as an inspiration for countless individuals faced with challenges, reminding them of the strength of human spirit and the boundless depths of human potential.
The USS Indianapolis, with its majestic structure and formidable firepower, was not just any ship. It was entrusted with a mission of paramount importance in late July 1945. With its impressive stature and formidable capabilities, was a testament to the prowess of American naval engineering during its time. The USS Indianapolis had a complement of approximately 1,195 crewmen when it embarked on its fateful mission in July 1945. Before its tragic end, the ship had a storied history, playing significant roles in various naval operations. Before the outbreak of World War II, the USS Indianapolis served primarily in the Pacific, participating in exercises and showing the flag. It was a symbol of American naval power and was often used for diplomatic missions. In 1936, for instance, it transported President Franklin D. Roosevelt to South America for the Buenos Aires Peace Conference. With the onset of World War II, the USS Indianapolis was thrust into active combat duty. It participated in numerous campaigns in the Pacific Theater. The ship provided naval gunfire support during the invasion of Tarawa, softening up Japanese defenses. The Indianapolis played a crucial role in the invasions of Kwajalein and Eniwetok, providing both anti-aircraft cover and bombardment duties. The ship was involved in the Battle of the Philippine Sea, one of the largest air-sea battles in history. The Indianapolis provided anti-aircraft defense during the battle, ensuring the safety of the American fleet. As the war neared its end, the USS Indianapolis supported the invasions of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, two critical battles that brought the Allies closer to Japan. The ship was given a top-secret assignment to deliver parts of the atomic bomb, codenamed Little Boy, to the U.S. Air Base at Tinian Island. This very bomb would soon change the course of history when it was dropped on Hiroshima, marking a pivotal moment in the war. With a sense of duty and urgency, the crew of the USS Indianapolis successfully completed their mission. On July 26, 1945, having delivered the atomic components, the ship set its course from Tinian, making a brief stop at Guam. Its next destination was Leyte, an island in the Philippines where it was scheduled for training exercises. The USS Indianapolis glided smoothly over the calm waters of the Philippine Sea. The moon, nearly full, cast a silvery glow over the vast expanse, making the waves shimmer. The warm tropical air was filled with the hum of the ship's engines and the distant chatter of sailors. Some were on deck, enjoying the cool breeze, sharing stories, or simply gazing at the stars. Others were below deck, resting or writing letters home.
Before the attack, the ship was like a small town at sea. We had movies, we had bands playing, and there was a sense of camaraderie among the crew.
The day was like any other. Men were laughing, playing cards, writing letters home. There was no sense of impending doom.
The ship had just completed a top-secret mission, and there was a palpable sense of accomplishment and anticipation of reaching their next destination. As the ship sailed through the tranquil waters of the Philippine Sea, the unexpected happened. In the eerie silence of the early hours of July 30th, 1945, the USS Indianapolis was ambushed. Two torpedoes, launched from the lurking Japanese submarine I-58, struck the ship's starboard side. Suddenly, without warning, a massive explosion rocked the ship. The force was so intense that men were thrown off their feet. A bright flash illuminated the night, followed by a deafening roar.
Before the attack, I was thinking about my family, about getting back home. The ship was like a sanctuary, a piece of America in the middle of the ocean. When we were hit, I was thrown off my feet. The ship started tilting, and water was pouring in everywhere. It was a nightmare.
The ship shuddered violently, and a plume of fire and smoke erupted from its starboard side. Panic and confusion set in as the realization dawned on the crew that they had been hit. Alarms blared throughout the ship. The once steady hum of the engines was replaced by the sound of twisting metal, rushing water, and the frantic shouts of men trying to make sense of the situation. The ship began to list heavily to one side, making it difficult for the crew to maintain their footing. In the dim emergency lighting, sailors scrambled to their battle stations while others desperately searched for life jackets. The smell of burning fuel and the acrid smoke made it hard to breathe. Some men, dazed and injured, were helped by their shipmates, while others, trapped below deck, cried out for assistance. Before the crew could fully grasp the magnitude of the first explosion, another torpedo struck. This second blow was even more devastating, causing a massive section of the ship to buckle and cave in. As the ship took on water, many realized that it was only a matter of time before it would be completely submerged. Desperate to escape the sinking vessel, sailors and Marines jumped overboard, some plunging into the sea from great heights. Others tried to launch lifeboats, but the ship's severe tilt made it nearly impossible. Amidst the chaos, acts of heroism emerged. Some crew members, despite their injuries, helped others to safety, while officers tried to maintain order, urging men to abandon ship and stay together. The ship was engulfed by the ocean's depths. Within just 12 minutes of the initial torpedo strike, the USS Indianapolis, once a proud and formidable vessel, disappeared beneath the waves, leaving hundreds of its crew stranded in the open ocean. The rapidity of the sinking meant there was no time to send a distress signal, leaving the ship and the crew still inside to their tragic fate. The aftermath of the attack was a scene of chaos and despair. Of the 1,195 brave crewmen aboard, approximately 300 were entombed with the ship. The rest, around 900 men, were cast adrift in the vast shark-infested waters. With limited lifeboats, scanty food, and almost no fresh water, their ordeal had just begun. For the next 5 endless days, these men battled against all odds. The first night adrift at sea for the survivors of the USS Indianapolis was a nightmarish blend of shock, fear, and desperation. As the last remnants of the USS Indianapolis disappeared beneath the waves, hundreds of men found themselves floating in the vast expanse of the Philippine Sea. The initial shock of the sinking was still fresh, and many were struggling to come to terms with the reality of their situation. The tropical warmth of the day quickly gave way to the chill of the night. Even in the warm waters of the Philippine Sea, prolonged exposure, especially at night, could lead to hypothermia. The survivors, many in just their uniforms or underwear, began to feel the cold seeping into their bones. Understanding the need for collective strength and support, many survivors began to form groups. They would link arms, huddle together, or tie themselves to floating debris or life rafts. This not only provided some semblance of security, but also helped them stay warm. The moonlit waters, while providing some visibility, also revealed the ominous silhouettes of sharks circling the groups of survivors. The blood from the wounded and the thrashing of men in the water attracted these predators.
You could see their fins circling around. Every now and then, you'd hear a blood-curdling scream and know that another man was taken.
The combination of shock, dehydration, and exposure began to take a toll on the men's mental state. Some started to hallucinate, seeing mirages of islands or ships. Others, overwhelmed by despair, simply let go and drifted away.
Some men were so sunburned, their skin was blistered and peeling. They'd become delirious, mumbling about loved ones and home.
Despite the dire circumstances, many survivors held on to hope. They whispered words of encouragement to each other, shared stories, and even sang songs to lift their spirits. The second day and night adrift at sea for the survivors of the USS Indianapolis brought new challenges and deepened the desperation of their situation. As dawn broke on the second day, the survivors were met with the intense heat of the tropical sun. With little to no shade and their skin already burned from the previous day, the sun's rays were relentless. Dehydration became a severe concern.
The sun would come up, and it would just cook you. Your tongue would swell up from the thirst. Lips would crack and bleed.
Any supplies that the men had managed to salvage from the sinking ship, such as rations or fresh water, were quickly running out. Some tried to catch rainwater in their hands or makeshift containers, while others attempted to catch fish. The sharks remained a constant threat. As more men succumbed to their injuries or the elements, the sharks became bolder. The survivors had to remain vigilant, trying to fend off the predators with kicks and punches.
During the day, the sharks would circle us waiting. Every so often, one would dart in, and there'd be a scream. It was a constant terror.
By the second night, the effects of dehydration, hunger, and exposure were taking a severe toll. Delirium set in for many. Some men began to hallucinate, imagining rescue ships on the horizon or hearing the voices of loved ones.
I saw men who thought they were back on the Indianapolis, trying to climb back aboard. Others were talking to family members who weren't there.
As with the first night, the temperature dropped, and the cold became another adversary. The men huddled closer, trying to share body heat and offer comfort.
The nights were a strange mix of cold and fear. We'd try to sleep, but the nightmares, the cold, and the sharks kept most of us awake.
Despite the worsening conditions, many survivors continued to support one another, understanding that their best chance of survival was to stay together.
We kept each other going. When one man would start to give up, the others would rally around him, tell him stories, sing songs, anything to keep his spirits up.
The third day and night for the survivors of the USS Indianapolis intensified their ordeal. As time wore on, the physical and psychological toll deepened, and the challenges became even more daunting. By the third day, dehydration was becoming critical. The intense tropical sun, combined with the salty sea air, left the men parched. Their throats were dry and swollen, and many had stopped urinating, a clear sign of severe dehydration.
Your tongue felt like a piece of leather. Some men were so desperate they drank seawater, which only led to madness.
As the hours dragged on, hope began to wane. The vastness of the ocean and the absence of any sign of rescue weighed heavily on the men's spirits. Some began to lose hope entirely.
You could see the light go out in some men's eyes. They'd just give up, let go, and drift away.
The sharks continued to be a relentless threat. As more men became weak or injured, the sharks' attacks became more frequent and aggressive. Being adrift at sea for days, exposed to the elements and deprived of food, water, and sleep, many of the survivors of the USS Indianapolis began to experience severe hallucinations and delusions. The combination of physical and psychological stressors created a surreal and often terrifying environment for the men. One of the most common hallucinations was the sight of rescue ships or islands on the horizon. The intense desire to be saved manifested in these mirages, which would vanish as men swam towards them.
Men would suddenly shout, "I see a ship," and start swimming off into the distance. By the time we'd catch up to them, they'd be in tears, realizing it was just a mirage.
Many survivors reported having conversations with loved ones who weren't there. These hallucinations were often comforting, providing a brief respite from the grim reality.
I remember talking to my mother. She was right there with me in the water, telling me to hold on, that everything would be okay.
Some men became convinced that they were not in the ocean, but rather in a freshwater lake or river. They believed that salvation lay below and would dive deep, thinking they would reach the bottom and walk to shore.
One guy was convinced we were in a river. He kept saying he could see the riverbed and that he was going to walk to shore. We tried to stop him, but he dove down and never came back up.
A particularly haunting delusion was the belief that the USS Indianapolis had not sunk and that they could still climb back aboard. Men would swim towards the depths, believing they were returning to the ship. While many hallucinations were born out of hope or the desire for comfort, the reality of the situation would often snap the men back to their grim circumstances.
You'd have these moments where you'd drift off into a dream, but then the cold or a shark's bump would bring you right back. It was this constant tug-of-war between hope and despair.
The third night brought a familiar chill, and with it a deepening sense of despair. The cold seemed to seep into their very bones, and the darkness of the night mirrored the growing darkness in many of the men's hearts.
The third night was the hardest. You could feel the hope slipping away. We clung to each other, praying for a miracle.
Despite the dire circumstances, some survivors found solace in their faith. They whispered prayers, sang hymns, and shared stories of better times, trying to keep the flame of hope alive. The fourth day for the survivors of the USS Indianapolis was a culmination of their harrowing ordeal. As the hours ticked by, the situation grew increasingly dire, but the promise of another dawn also brought with it a glimmer of hope. The sun on the fourth day seemed even more relentless. Its rays beat down on the men, exacerbating their dehydration and sunburns. The reflection off the water intensified the heat, making it almost unbearable. With each passing hour, the situation became more desperate. Many of the men were on the brink of death, their bodies ravaged by dehydration, saltwater poisoning, and exhaustion.
I saw strong men who had survived battles and seen the worst of war, reduced to tears. The thirst, the pain, the sheer hopelessness, it was overwhelming.
The ever-present threat of sharks persisted. The predators, drawn by the blood and movement, continued their relentless assault on the weakened men.
The sharks never let up. It was like they knew we were at our weakest and they were closing in.
During the day, the sharks would often circle the groups of survivors, occasionally darting in to attack. The visibility during the day allowed men to see the sharks approaching, leading to frantic efforts to fend them off. At night, however, the cover of darkness made the nighttime attacks even more terrifying. Men would be pulled under without warning, and the darkness made it difficult to see where the threat was coming from. The men quickly realized that there was safety in numbers. They tried to form tight groups with the stronger and uninjured men on the perimeter, trying to protect the wounded in the center. When a shark approached, they would kick and splash, trying to deter it.
We'd take turns sleeping, with those awake keeping watch for sharks. If one came close, we'd all start splashing and shouting, trying to scare it off.
Some survivors recounted seeing men being attacked by multiple sharks at once, while others spoke of seeing sharks fighting over the bodies of the dead.
I saw two sharks go after one guy, each grabbing an end and pulling. It's an image I'll never forget.
The extreme conditions faced by the survivors of the USS Indianapolis not only led to hallucinations and delusions, but also resulted in heightened stress, paranoia, and desperation. This intense psychological strain, combined with physical exhaustion, dehydration, and hunger, sometimes led to violent outbursts among the men. As days passed without rescue, hope began to wane for many of the survivors. The constant threat of sharks, the lack of food and fresh water, and the exposure to the elements heightened feelings of vulnerability and fear. In their delirious states, some men became suspicious of their fellow survivors. Paranoia set in, leading them to believe that others were hoarding supplies or plotting against them. There were accounts of men accusing others of hiding fresh water or food, leading to physical altercations. The mental and emotional toll, combined with the physical suffering, led some men to harm themselves. Despair and the belief that they would never be rescued drove some to see this as a way to end their suffering. Some survivors recounted witnessing fellow sailors, overwhelmed by hopelessness, deliberately letting go of their flotation devices and allowing themselves to sink into the depths. In their delirious and desperate states, some men became aggressive, attacking fellow survivors. These attacks were often unprovoked and were the result of hallucinations, delusions, or sheer panic. There were accounts of survivors attacking others, believing they were sharks or enemy soldiers. In their weakened and confused state, they perceived threats even from their fellow shipmates. While there were limited resources available, any perceived hoarding or unfair distribution often led to conflicts. Men would sometimes fight over life vests, pieces of debris, or any remnants of supplies. A group of survivors who found a crate of potatoes had to defend it from others who, in their desperation, tried to take more than their share.
You'd see the best and worst of men in those waters. Some would share their last drop of water, while others, driven mad by thirst, would lash out at anyone they thought had a secret stash.
I saw men once full of fight and spirit just give up. They'd whisper a prayer or say goodbye, then just let go and sink away. It was heart-wrenching.
I remember trying to calm down a buddy who was convinced I was an enemy soldier. His eyes were wild, and he kept shouting. It took 3 of us to hold him down.
I saw 2 men fighting over a life jacket. Both were so weak, it was more of a desperate clinging than a real fight. But the fear in their eyes was real.
Those days in the water tested everything you believed about yourself and humanity. There were moments of pure despair, but also moments where you saw true heroism and sacrifice.
As the survivors grouped together in the water, clinging to rafts, floater nets, and other debris, some men stumbled upon wooden crates. Upon breaking them open, they found they were filled with potatoes.
It was a small miracle. Amidst all the despair, Finding those potatoes gave us a glimmer of hope.
The potatoes, though soaked in salt water, provided some nourishment. Men would share them, taking small bites to make them last as long as possible. For many, it was the only solid food they had during their days adrift.
We'd ration them out, taking turns to have a bite. It wasn't much, but it kept us going.
While the potatoes provided some sustenance, they were soaked in salt water, which exacerbated the men's thirst. Consuming salt water even indirectly can lead to dehydration, so the men had to be cautious. The discovery of the potatoes was one of the few positive moments during the harrowing ordeal faced by the survivors. It's a testament to the human spirit's ability to find hope in the direst of circumstances.
You'd eat a bit of potato and it would give you strength, but then the thirst would hit you even harder.
As night fell on the fourth day, the cold returned, but it was the emotional chill of despair that was most piercing. The darkness seemed to stretch on endlessly, and many wondered if they would live to see another dawn.
That fourth night, it felt like the world had forgotten us. Every minute felt like an hour, every hour like a day.
Yet, even in their darkest moments, some survivors clung to hope. They whispered words of encouragement, prayed together, and held on to the belief that rescue was coming. The fourth day marked the climax of the survivors' ordeal. Their physical and mental states were at their lowest, but the human spirit's resilience shone through. The dawn of the fifth day would finally bring the long-awaited rescue, ending one of the most tragic episodes in naval history. On the morning of the fifth day, as the sun began to cast its first rays across the vast expanse of the Philippine Sea, a PV-1 Ventura patrol plane piloted by Lieutenant Wilbur Chuck Gwynn and his co-pilot Lieutenant Warren Caldwell was on a routine patrol flight. As they flew over the area, they spotted what appeared to be an oil slick. Upon closer inspection, they realized it was a group of men floating in the water.
Seeing that plane circle above us, it was like a beacon of hope. We knew that help was finally on the way.
Gwynn immediately dropped a life raft and a radio transmitter to the survivors, and then radioed for assistance. The first to arrive on the scene was Gwynn's plane, which circled the area, providing some reassurance to the men below. Over the next few hours, more planes and ships arrived to assist in the rescue. The USS Cecil J. Doyle was one of the first ships on the scene. Using searchlights, the ship's crew began pulling survivors from the water. The rescue operation was challenging. Many of the survivors were weak, injured, and in a state of shock. Some were too weak to grab onto the ropes thrown to them, while others were terrified of the sharks that still lurked nearby. As rescue ships approached and began pulling men from the water, not all of the survivors reacted with relief. The combination of dehydration, sun exposure, and the trauma of the past days had left some in a state of delirium.
I saw one of the guys push away a life ring thrown to him. He was shouting something about it being a trap. It took a while for the rescuers to calm him down and get him aboard.
Some of the survivors, in their confused state, perceived the rescuers as threats. There were accounts of men lashing out either because they didn't recognize the rescuers or because their prolonged ordeal had made them distrustful of any help.
One of our guys, when they tried to pull him aboard, started swinging. He was convinced they were enemy soldiers. It was heartbreaking to see him fight those who were trying to save him.
Perhaps the most tragic were the instances of survivors, once aboard the rescue ships, jumping back into the sea. Their delirious minds, combined with hallucinations, made them believe they were safer in the water, or that they were being called back.
I watched in disbelief as one of the rescued men, after being given water and wrapped in a blanket, suddenly got up and jumped overboard. He was shouting about needing to go back. We tried to save him, but he disappeared beneath the waves.
The reactions of these survivors underscore the profound psychological trauma they endured. The sea, which had been both a threat and their only refuge for days, had imprinted so deeply on their minds that even the safety of rescue was met with distrust and fear. The rescue of the USS Indianapolis survivors was not just a physical operation, but also a psychological one, as rescuers had to navigate the deeply ingrained traumas and fears of the men they were trying to save. The physical condition of the survivors of the USS Indianapolis when they were found was a testament to the extreme hardships they had endured over several days adrift at sea. The combination of exposure to the elements, lack of food and fresh water, and the trauma of the sinking and subsequent shark attacks had taken a severe toll on their bodies. One of the most immediate and life-threatening challenges the survivors faced was dehydration. Without fresh water, the human body can only survive for a few days. The symptoms of dehydration are progressive and can become severe quickly. Many of the men had severely swollen and cracked lips, a telltale sign of dehydration. Their skin was dry and taut and their eyes sunken. Some were so parched they could barely speak or swallow. Being exposed to the tropical sun without any shade or protection led to severe sunburns. The reflection of the sun on the water intensified its effects. The skin of many survivors was blistered and raw. Some had burns so severe that their skin was peeling off in sheets. Others had makeshift coverings, like torn pieces of clothing, tied around their heads to shield them from the sun. Prolonged exposure to salt water can lead to painful sores and ulcers, especially in areas where the wet skin rubs against clothing or other surfaces. Many of the men had developed painful saltwater sores on their legs, arms, and torsos. These sores were not only painful but also posed a risk of infection. The effort to stay afloat, especially for those without life jackets or flotation devices, led to extreme physical exhaustion. Some men were found in a near catatonic state, their muscles having given out from the effort of treading water for days. They were limp and unresponsive, their bodies having reached the limits of endurance. The oil caused burning sensations in their eyes and made swallowing even more painful. Without food, the men's bodies began to consume their own muscle and fat for energy, leading to rapid weight loss and weakening. Many of the survivors appeared gaunt, their ribs and bones protruding. The physical state of the survivors when they were finally rescued was a stark reminder of the human body's fragility and its incredible ability to endure. The rescuers were met with a scene of emaciated, burned, and oil-covered men, many of whom were on the brink of death. The immediate medical attention they received was crucial in ensuring their survival and eventual recovery. By the time the rescue was completed, only 316 men out of the initial 1,095 were pulled from the water alive. The sinking of the USS Indianapolis resulted in the greatest single loss of life at sea from a single ship in the history of the U.S. Navy. The survivors were taken to Guam for medical treatment and debriefing. The news of the sinking and the subsequent ordeal faced by the survivors shocked the nation. The rescue of the survivors of the USS Indianapolis marked the end of a tragic chapter in naval history. The courage and resilience of the survivors, as well as the efforts of their rescuers, serve as a testament to the human spirit's indomitable will to survive against all odds. The delay in the rescue of the USS Indianapolis survivors is a tragic and controversial aspect of the ship's sinking. Several factors contributed to the delay. No distress signal. The USS Indianapolis sank so quickly in just 12 minutes that it was unable to send a distress signal. As a result, there was no immediate knowledge of the ship's sinking. Failed to report non-arrival. The ship was expected to arrive at Leyte on July 31st, 1945. However, when it did not arrive, no report of its non-arrival was made. This was a significant oversight. No routine search. Since there was no distress signal and no report of the ship's non-arrival, no routine search was initiated for the missing ship. Assumption of safety. The route the USS Indianapolis took was assumed to be safe from Japanese submarines, leading to a belief that the ship wouldn't face any threats. Negligence and controversy. The delay in rescue and the circumstances surrounding the sinking led to controversy. Captain Charles B. McVeigh III, the ship's commanding officer, was court-martialed and convicted of hazarding his ship by failing to zigzag. This decision was controversial, as many believed McVeigh was made a scapegoat for the Navy's mistakes. Notably, even the commander of the Japanese submarine that sank the Indianapolis testified that zigzagging would not have made a difference. In 2000, the U.S. Congress passed a resolution exonerating Captain McVeigh. This was further endorsed by President Bill Clinton, bringing some closure to this tragic chapter. The story of the USS Indianapolis serves as a poignant reminder of the sacrifices made by those who serve, the unpredictable nature of war, and the indomitable spirit of survival against all odds.
A man aboard a vessel was roused at daybreak, needing to use the washroom, and groggily wandered in his undergarments. As he entered the confined space, a violent jolt sent the boat into chaos, plunging it into complete darkness. He felt water rushing in and, panic-stricken, sought an exit, only to encounter sealed doors. As the ship found its resting place deep in the ocean's abyss, he astonishingly located a small safe haven. His survival hinged on a pair of mattresses, a restroom, and a cola bottle. But how much time did he truly have left? Harrison O'Keene, a Nigerian cook, was on board the AHT Jaskin 4, a tugboat, in 2013. The vessel was operating off the Nigerian coast. On the fateful day of May 26, 2013, the AHT Jaskin 4 was in the midst of its regular operations off the coast of Nigeria. Situated in the Gulf of Guinea, this region is known for its unpredictable weather patterns and sudden oceanic changes. The seasoned 12-man crew, comprising 11 Nigerians and a Ukrainian captain, settled in for the night, confident in their routine task. Yet the ensuing hours held unforeseen peril. That morning, heavy swells, which are large and voluminous waves, hit the vessel. Such swells can be triggered by distant weather events or changes in wind patterns, and can travel long distances before they reach a particular location. The intensity of these swells was so significant that the tugboat couldn't maintain its stability against them. Amidst the raging storm, Harrison O'Keene rose early to prep breakfast. While in the restroom, a monstrous wave capsized the ship. Disoriented, Harrison was flung about as the ship rapidly filled with water. The rapid capsize of a vessel is one of the worst maritime disasters, primarily because it offers little to no time for crew members to respond or evacuate. In the case of the AHT Jaskin 4, it not only capsized but also began sinking quickly, pulling everything and everyone inside down with it. Given the swift sequence of events, escape routes like lifeboats or rafts become inaccessible or unusable, trapping those on board. The vessel soon settled on the ocean floor, approximately 30 meters below the surface. The sudden pressure change, the influx of cold seawater, and the disorienting sensation of being upside down in a sinking ship are among the harshest conditions a person can experience. For most crew members, these combined factors sadly resulted in a tragic end. However, against all odds, Harrison O'Keene found himself in a position where survival, although immensely challenging, was still within the realm of possibility. In the midst of chaos, as cold seawater rushed into the capsized vessel, Harrison O'Keene's immediate instinct was to find a refuge. As the ship filled with water, pockets of air became trapped in various sections. One such pocket was formed in an anteroom adjacent to the ship's bathroom, and it was here that O'Keene found his temporary sanctuary. The science of air pockets in submerged environments is a complex one. When a large vessel like the AHT Jaskin 4 capsizes and sinks, the ship's unique design, combined with the angle and speed of its descent, can lead to the formation of these life-saving pockets. They aren't merely remnants of the air from above the surface. As water floods compartments, it displaces the air inside, pushing it into areas where water hasn't yet penetrated. However, this pocket of air wasn't infinite. With every breath O'Keene took, he was using up some of the limited oxygen available and exhaling carbon dioxide. Over time, without proper ventilation or a way to replenish the oxygen, carbon dioxide levels would rise, leading to hypercapnia, a condition that can be fatal. Apart from the dwindling oxygen, another challenge was the water temperature. The Atlantic Ocean, especially at depths, can be chilling. Prolonged exposure to such cold temperatures drastically reduces body heat, leading to hypothermia, a condition where the body loses heat faster than it can produce, eventually leading to a shutdown of bodily functions. Venturing out of his air pocket, Harrison scoured the ship for supplies, constructing a makeshift platform from 2 mattresses to stave off hypothermia, clad only in his underwear. The darkness was palpable, his only sustenance a bottle of Coke. With every breath, his haven grew rich with carbon dioxide, imperiling his life. Despite efforts to escape using a rope, he remained trapped, haunted by thoughts of his imminent 5th wedding anniversary, his family, and possible sea creatures in the ship. 3 days after the accident, a dive team from the DCN Diving Company was dispatched to the sunken vessel. Their mission was primarily to retrieve the bodies of the deceased crew members, as the probability of finding survivors after such a long time was virtually non-existent. When the divers descended, they were operating in pitch-black conditions, reliant on their flashlights and the guidelines they set to navigate the upturned ship. The eerie silence of the deep, occasionally interrupted by the creaks of the sinking ship and the diver's own breathing apparatus, set a somber tone. Then, in a moment that stunned the diving community and the world, a hand reached out in the darkness, touching one of the divers. The initial shock was palpable, as such an encounter was entirely unexpected.
Okay. What's that? Okay. All right, you found one, yeah? He's alive, he's alive. Okay, keep him there, keep him there. All right, just, all right, just hold him there, okay? Just keep him there. Fucking hell, I don't know what we're gonna do. All right, just keep him there and keep him calm, okay? All right, just reassure him, pat him on the shoulder. Okay. All right. All right. Okay, just reassure him. Give him a thumbs up and reassure him. Okay, reassure him. Keep reassuring him.
Once the divers realized that O'Keen was alive, a new, urgent mission began to extract him safely from the wreck. Emerging from such depths isn't straightforward. The human body, when exposed to deep-sea pressures, absorbs nitrogen from the breathing gas. Ascending to the surface too rapidly would cause this nitrogen to form bubbles in the bloodstream, leading to a condition known as decompression sickness, or the bends, which can be fatal. On discovering Harrison, Alex Gibbs and his team supplied him with fresh air via a hose, eventually transitioning to an oxygen-helium mix due to Harrison's carbon dioxide saturation. Fitted with a specialized diving suit, his return to the surface required meticulous planning and multiple decompression stops. Harrison lost consciousness but was ultimately saved. Post-rescue, O'Keen was placed in a decompression chamber, a controlled environment where pressure could be slowly reduced, allowing his body to safely off-gas the excess nitrogen. This process took an additional 60 hours, almost as long as he had been trapped underwater. The psychological aftermath of such a traumatic event can't be overstated. O'Keen would likely have experienced PTSD symptoms, including flashbacks, nightmares, and severe anxiety. The resilience he demonstrated during his ordeal was equally crucial in the weeks and months that followed as he navigated the emotional and mental challenges of his experience. Alex assisted Harrison throughout his recovery. Grateful yet traumatized, Harrison vowed to avoid the ocean. However, 9 years later, he overcame his fears, becoming a certified commercial diver. Nico, one of his saviors, presented his diploma. Today, Harrison dives 50 meters deep, viewing the ocean as a comforting realm. Reflecting on his harrowing experience, Harrison emphasizes the mental strength that saved him. In the face of danger, it's one's faith and mindset that truly matter. Harrison O'Keen's survival story transcends the narrative of one man's resilience. It challenges our understanding of human endurance and sheds light on the unpredictability of life and death situations. From a scientific perspective, the balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide within the air pocket, the body's ability to stave off hypothermia, and the psychological capacity to endure such extreme isolation are all areas of interest. His story serves as a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure, even in the most dire of circumstances. It also underscores the importance of safety protocols, training, and equipment in maritime operations, emphasizing that preparation and response mechanisms can be the difference between life and death.